Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's expert webinar, How to Make Feedback Fearless, brought to you by Get Abstract. My name is Ramona Marcinetti. I am your host, and I'm very much looking forward to spending the next 45 minutes with you. To warm you and myself a bit up, let me drop a first question for you in the chat right away. Somebody says already buenos dias, so you found the chat. That's great. So here's the question. How do you feel when you are about to give feedback? How do you feel when you're about to give feedback? We'll come back to your answers in a moment. So, my gosh, the chat is exploding already. While answers are coming in, let me introduce you to my guest, Joe Hirsch. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Ramona.
It's nice having you here today. Thank you so much for making time this early
It's
your
great to be
morning.
it's great to be back with you.
Joe is a best-selling author of The Feedback Fix and a global keynote speaker and TEDx speaker, and his mission is to make feedback fearless for leaders and their teams. And he is the host of a great podcast, which is called I Wish They Knew, a great title, by the way. And now you know, so please check out Joe's podcast. For those of you who joined Joe's September session with Get Abstract, you already know quite a bit about receiving feedback well. And today we are going to switch sides. We are going to talk about providing feedback well. So, whether you are focused on improving individual performance, team dynamics, or refining the organizational culture, there are tools to transform feedback from something really scary into an opportunity for growth and connection. And by the way, if you have any questions for Joe, please drop them in the Q&A. That's the round bubbles below the square chat icon. I think you already found it. We will address as many questions as possible throughout the session. And now let's come to the question that I asked initially. How does our audience feel when they are about to give feedback? Joe, I'm reading some of the answers. Anxious, a bit nervous, nervous to say something wrong, cautious, hopefully prepared, hesitant, scared and uncertain. Let me scroll. Worried. Oh my gosh. Stressed, unsure, excited, anxious, nervous. It depends. Yeah. Rehearsing, tense.
And a lot of those answers, Ramona, they remind me of the answers that I typically receive when I ask this question to the teams that I work with, either from the stage or in trainings around the world. And I ask a simple question, similar to the one that we asked here today. What would you rather? Would you rather
Mhm.
give feedback or do something else? And you would not believe what some people say. I looked at some of the answers from a recent keynote I did with a global pharmaceutical company a few weeks ago. You're not going to believe some of the answers that people gave. Over 50% of the people who who are not feedback fanatics, right? Some people are eager and hopeful and excited, and I wish everyone were a feedback fanatic.
Mhm.
But even if you're not a feedback fanatic, you answer that question with a sense of unease. A lot of people would rather stay late at work than actually give out their feedback. Some people would rather give up time off than actually share feedback with their teams. And there are actually people out there, Ramona, who would rather clean up the mess in their office microwave than actually clean out the feedback mess on their teams. So, yeah,
Mhm.
it's scary, it's hard, but there is a better way. And hopefully we'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get it. It can be really fruitless. It can be very scary. And sometimes we suffer through, or maybe even worse, shy away from difficult conversations, despite all the things that we know about the positive potential of feedback. So, very well, you joined us here today. That's a good first step. Um, let's look at why the fear of feedback is holding us back and how we can change that dynamic. Joe,
Yeah.
for a starter, do you mind elaborating a bit on the traditional feedback approach and why fear fails our ability to provide useful feedback?
Yeah, we're getting in our own way a lot of the times when we're sharing feedback with others because we're actually working against thousands of years of evolutionary science and biology. Because whenever we approach feedback as something that we're doing to another person, we're automatically triggering the brain's threat detection and its natural defense response. And so if I approach someone with the fearful question of, can I give you some feedback? Or it's more even accusatory, like, I want to tell you something you did wrong. So immediately people put up defenses. And it's really interesting because this question of what does feedback actually do to people on a brain based level is very strong, very astounding. Researchers who were trying to understand the effect of feedback on motivation asked this question to a bunch of people as they were hooked up to fMRI machines, and they watched the brain activity within those individuals as they threw out that question of, can I give you some feedback? And brain activity spiked. The cortisol levels in their brains, the centers controlling for fear and for anxiety, a lot of the responses that we heard here just now, that lit up in brains that were under attack by feedback.
Mhm.
So already when we approach that way, we're triggering the brain's natural threat response.
Mhm.
When we make feedback fearful, we're also contending with another issue, and that's time lapse. There's a natural forgetfulness that occurs from the moment we learn something until the moment that we actually do something with that information. So, if, for example, you're learning a new system at work and there's a new procedure for how to log into the system, and you went over it a week ago, but now you're trying to do it and you totally forgot how, that's because you're human and we forget because the longer the wait, the shorter the memory. And the same is true with feedback. Most of the times we avoid these conversations. We dodge, we disguise, we deny that there's an issue and we try to pretend that it'll get better by itself, but it really doesn't. Right. So
Mhm.
the longer we wait to have these conversations, the less we remember what happened and the less others remember what happened. And so now both of us, the giver and the receiver, are frantically trying to retrace our steps, put together the picture of performance that we thought happened, and neither of us really remember. So we're working against each other's best selves when feedback is fearful. And that's never a recipe for success or for progress.
Mhm. Here's a very interesting comment. Somebody says, I feel good providing feedback if I have good feedback. And we will
Yeah.
come to that later. I mean, feedback is not always good. That's probably also in the nature of feedback, but you can deliver it in a way that it has a positive impact. And we will come to that, promised.
Yeah. And I think it's
So,
true that the better the input, the better the output, right? So if we're
Mhm.
giving people better feedback, we can expect that they will receive it better as well, and that they will model better giving practices because that's what they've been raised with in the workplace.
Mhm. Joe, I want to quote from your book. That's a quote that I like very much. Giving feedback to others about things that they can't anymore change is like asking them to step out from a plug of cement that has already set. I mean, try that.
Yeah, my kid tried
It-
that once. It didn't end up well for him. So
oh, oh gosh.
yeah,
You're
we had a really
presenting
young
a
kid out.
new approach. You're presenting a new approach, and that's called feed forward. What is that exactly?
Yeah, feed forward is more than just a play on words. It's a playbook for a whole new way to think about how we give feedback. It's a shift in our message and our mindset. And it's an approach that is fearless in its nature, that helps others become fearless in the way they receive the feedback because it focuses on future possibilities and not just past failures. And too often, that's what we're doing in traditional feedback. We're looking back on a time that people can't change or control instead of out towards a future that they can. So, with Feed Forward, we make a deliberate shift towards the things that people still can change, to the things that people still can control. And rather than approaching with a mindset of, I'm here to fix it and fix you, we say, I'm here to frame it. I want to help you together, working together, figure out a way that we can identify the issue and move forward on it. And when you drill down to the essentials of this feed forward approach, the reason why it makes feedback fearless, it's because we start making important shifts in the way we think about and speak about feedback in these everyday conversations. It's no longer just about power, what I can do to someone. It's about partnership.
Mhm.
It's no longer just about a rating or a report. It's about a relationship. We're doing this together. We're working as two people towards a common goal. And it's not just about an HR initiative, it's a people initiative, it's a growth initiative, it's a human initiative. And most importantly, we stop focusing just on the obstacles and we start looking ahead towards the opportunities because we can't go back and fix the past. We have to learn from the past. You either learn or you fail, right? And
Mhm.
if you fail to learn, then you haven't gained anything from the process. And so that's
Absolutely.
what makes feed forward so important. We move forward together and make progress while we still can and where we
Mhm.
still can.
Yeah. Giving feedback, especially when it's critical, is super difficult, but it is a necessary function of leading teams and also of like collaboration, working with teammates. You need it in every aspect of life, basically, professional and also private. And in the feedback fix, you describe the praise sandwich, tucking negative feedback between two compliments. And I caught myself doing that before. I told my kid, "Oh, you painted such a beautiful picture. Next time, maybe cover the table, but keep painting these super pictures." Stuff like that. I mean, everybody knows that, I guess. You have a better proposal, don't you?
Yeah, I think the sandwich doesn't satisfy. And look, I'm all for praise. I think praise pays. And we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later on in our conversation when we get to the power of positive feedback and how we can model a more trust centered version of feedback. But the sandwich approach really works against this relationship that we're trying to build with feedback. And it does that for two reasons. The first is that when we're hiding the truth, when we're disguising our real intent, so people have a very hard time actually understanding what we're trying to deliver, what our real objective is here. So if someone were to say to me, Joe, you're one of our top salespeople, you have a tendency to talk over others in meetings a lot, and that's what kind of happened earlier today. But look, you're one of our best people, so just like try to work on that other thing, and like we'll move on. So I'm hearing the two ends of the sandwich, which are praise. I'm not hearing the part in the middle, which is the criticism, which is the thing that needs correction. So already I'm confused about your intent and about what my next steps are. But it's not just about just diluting the message, Ramona. It's really about diminishing trust. Because if I'm working with someone and I want to share something important with that person, and I want that person to know that I care about them, so why am I speaking around the issue? Why am I not speaking right to it? Because people are smarter than we think when it comes to these conversations. They will say to themselves as they're hearing the praise sandwich, if you know me, if you like me, and if you respect me, then why don't you just come out and tell me?
Mhm.
And so not being candid in these conversations is a liability. And that's what we try to address with this feedback wrap approach, WRAP, which is a 4-part plan for having more candid but caring conversations so that others know exactly where we stand, but they feel like they're a part of that process and they're a partner rather than just a subject or an object. And we do it in really 4 simple steps. We start by talking about what and where, the W. Give the context for why you're having the feedback conversation. Make it clear what you're focusing on, and so others can follow you as
Mhm.
you give it. R, focus on the reason for why you're giving this feedback. And it's not just a technical reason. I'm giving this Joe, feedback to you, Joe, because you talked over someone in the meeting and the meeting went off the rails. You want to give a reason for caring. I care about you, Joe. I care about your work and I care about the way that our team thrives. And I know you do too. So I want to tell you this because I'm not sure you realized it, but this is what happened. This is what I observed earlier today. And so by giving a reason for caring, we help others understand this is not an attack. This is
Mhm.
an act of service. This is an expression of caring. And so by talking about what and where and the reason for caring, we already put the feedback conversation on a ground that is more clear and more caring. The next two steps, the A and the P, that's where the real magic of this feed forward approach comes in and why it makes things fearless for others. A stands for affect. And here's where we really get into the psychology of how to have these difficult conversations. People resist being changed. It's not that they don't like change, they don't like being changed. And when I approach with a judgment that implies that you need to change something, there's a natural resistance and a reluctance to want to do that because I no longer have my sense of agency. But when I stop accusing and judging and I move from blame to contribution with an expression of, here's how I felt when that happened, Joe. When you spoke over our teammate in that meeting, so I noticed a shift in the dynamics. I felt like we got a little bit off track, and the best ideas may not have been able to emerge. And I felt bad that that happened. That's a different kind of a statement than, Joe, you were absolutely out of line when you cut off Ramona. And that was the second time that happened in a week. So moving from blame to contribution and from you did this to I felt this, that affective shift the A, makes a huge difference. And then finally, the most important part of the wrap approach is the last one, the prompt, where we stop telling and selling others what we think we should do or what we're seeing as the solution, and we invite them to become part of the process of improvement, to be our partners in progress. And we say to them, "Hey, Joe, what do you think? What do you think should happen next?" And I've observed in the work that I've done with organizations around the world on this very topic, one of two things happens. So either the person who is given this feedback becomes defensive still, and they put up a defensive posture and they'll deny and they'll deflect. And that may feel like, oh, but I thought this was supposed to work. And you may feel like, well, it didn't yield a positive outcome. It did, because now you have more information and you know
Mhm.
that this is more than just an issue about someone talking over someone in a meeting. There's something else beneath the surface. We need to get to that. What I often see, Ramona, is the opposite, though. When you talk about what's happening, where it's happening, and establish a context of caring, and you approach with curiosity rather than blame, and you ask people for their ideas and suggestions about how to move forward together, they respond as a partner and they start to have ideas and suggestions that are probably just as good as the ones that you were going to offer or may even be better. But here's the difference. They've come up with those answers.
Mhm.
They've proposed those solutions. They've charted their next steps. And now they're owners of the situation and of their progress.
Yeah,
We can't force people to change. We can only invite them to take that journey with us. And with the wrap approach, we deliver a more candid, more caring, more collaborative approach that invites people to join us as partners in their progress. And so that we don't have to force a change, we can just produce an insight.
that's great. Say, Joe, does the rep approach work on all levels of the hierarchy, like with your teammates, but also when you're giving feedback to leaders or when you're passing feedback down to people that you're leading? I'm actually sneaking in a question from the audience here. How do you recommend giving critical feedback to leaders above you?
It's such a great question. And yes, the wrap approach can even work when you're managing up and, giving feedback upwards to your manager. Let me give a quick example of what that might sound like. So, Ramona, I'm your direct report, and I'm a little bit concerned about something that happened at the meeting. I felt like you jumped to a topic with before we actually had fully fleshed out what I thought was a plan to move forward on a particular issue we were facing. So I might take you aside and I can use the same thing by being very specific what happened, where it happened, give my reason for why I care that this happened. I'm concerned like you are for the success of this project and the success of our initiative. And I felt that we might have just moved on before uh, things got fully baked. Now, the prompt is a little different because as your report, I'm not going to say to you, hey, Ramona, what are you going to do differently next time? But the prompt sounds a little different here when you're managing up. It would sound something like this. Um, is there something that can you put it back on yourself? Is there something that we could do to find some time to discuss this issue a little bit more? What are some ways that we might move forward on the issue that is important to us that I feel like wasn't addressed, but before or as we move on with this other initiative? Because I think we're all wondering here, how can we still give that attention to that issue while still moving on in the manner that you suggested? So you're still not playing boss, right? That's important. You're being specific. You're not playing boss. You're respecting the lines of hierarchy here,
Mhm.
but at the same time, you're making it clear to your boss and inviting your boss to participate and lead on the issue with the prompt of how do you think we might still go about making this happen? So you haven't given up on the importance of the issue, but at the same time, you haven't compromised your intent to move forward on that issue. So it's a delicate line between still being candid and yet
Mhm.
preserving the lines of authority here and not diminishing your boss's agency or authority, but rather just reminding your boss, we still would like to learn how to move forward on this. What are your suggestions on how we do that? Can you advise us on what our next steps could be?
Mhm. Yeah, that's very good advice. A delicate line. Okay. Joe, what conditions are necessary for negative feedback to create a positive image? We had it in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important that that even when you're giving negative feedback, it's not just a question of how, but also how often. Because if you're having these conversations more frequently, then some interesting studies have shown the power of high frequency, but maybe lower quality feedback. So they're happening more often, but maybe not as perfectly as you would like. And the research shows that the more frequent the conversations, the more frequent the feedback cadence, the, the higher levels of engagement on the team, the more likely there is to be action taken on a particular initiative. Uh, the more likely you will find that people are willing to speak up freely in the future. So all of these things happen when feedback becomes a feature and not just something that is happening sporadically. The
Hmm.
cadence of feedback is really important. So that's one thing that I think is really, really important. I also think it's important that you as a feedback giver ask more than you assume. And this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about that prompt in the wrap. If we assume another person's intentions or actions, then we're not learning. And the goal of becoming fearless at giving feedback is to become a learn it all who can learn as much as we can, not just a know it all who thinks we know everything. And that shift from certainty to curiosity is an essential ingredient in this shift from making feedback something that is fearful to something that is fearless. And in my work with companies, I see this very often. The more that leaders get into the habit of asking and not assuming, of having more frequent conversations, even though they may not be perfect conversations with, and I understand why I should acknowledge, I understand why leaders want to wait till the perfect when they feel it's fully baked and they've got the conversation perfectly mapped in their heads. They're worried about rubbing someone the wrong way or leading someone off course or upending the project's uh, timeline or workflow. But I have to tell you over and over again, I see the same thing. The more frequently these conversations happen, the better they are for the organization, for the relationship, for the work, for the objectives. And so be focused. Okay. Really be focused on what it is that you want to happen. And that gets back to the specificity and the wrap, but also be frequent and ask more than you assume. If you do those things, there can be a positive outcome, even when the conversation has to focus on uncomfortable circumstances or truths.
Hmm. All right. So you mentioned listening, curiosity. Before someone said that they feel uncomfortable if they have to deliver negative feedback. But what about authenticity then? I mean, you have to be curious, I guess, but also authentic. And, when you deliver feedback, it doesn't help if it's not authentic, if it's not true what you're saying. What about that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think when we inflate our message, we don't do any good. We don't serve the issue. We don't serve the other individual on our team. So being authentic doesn't mean dressing up your feedback or disguising it in a way that you think will make you be perceived better by the other person. Ultimately, the goal of feedback is not to make someone feel better, it's to help someone do better. Now, that's not a license to trash someone with your feedback, but we
Hmm.
have to focus more on the outcomes rather than the impressions. And I think this is a very important distinction. Sometimes managers want to be nice, but ultimately, the nicest thing we can do for someone is to be candid and to be real with them and to say, look, I'm here to help you. I want to support you. And that's why I want to tell you exactly what's happening. And I'm going to share something with you which may not sound great, but now I want to work together on how we can move forward on it so that we can do this together. That's a much more authentic and resonant message than me trying to pretend like this isn't really as bad as it is and kind of walking past the issue rather than walking through it. And so I think to be authentic is to be caring, to be candid, and to be collaborative. And if we can do those three things, then authenticity will naturally come out because people know that even though they may not like what we have to say, they're gonna like that we actually said it because they know
Hmm.
it's coming from a place of care and concern, and others ultimately wanna help us do better work, not just make us feel better about our
Hmm.
work.
So in that sense, you basically cannot say anything wrong as long as you're honest without being brutal. You
Yeah,
cannot
I think
cannot do anything wrong.
yeah, I think, you can be brutally honest without being brutal. I
Hmm.
think that's
Hmm.
true. And we can tell people exactly what's happening because again, it just gets back to the question of what kind of workplace do you really want to create for your team? Do you want a workplace where people know what you think or where they don't? Because the human desire for certainty, for confidence, for agency is great. And we don't need studies to show this, though there's a huge body of literature around it. We know intuitively that when we work for someone who shares feedback with us freely and frequently and fearlessly, that's the kind of workplace where we know where we stand and we know the other person stands there with us.
Hmm.
And when we're standing together and making progress together and moving forward on these issues together, that delivers a jolt of agency, of trust, of confidence, and ultimately competence because we know that we may not get it right, but we know we're going to get it eventually because we have another person in our corner who's trying to help us. And they're doing that by being their authentic self.
Hmm.
And they're not hiding the issue, they're confronting it with us. And when that happens, we can move forward with clarity and purpose. And ultimately, we move forward together.
Hmm. Now, here's a very important question from the audience. When you receive negative feedback and words of abuse, that's important about that question, I think. What do you do? I mean, there is a line, I guess, between negative feedback that's brutally honest, but not brutal, but actual words of abuse.
Yeah, you should never settle for abuse because if someone is using feedback um, to actually cause harm rather than to help you make progress, that's not feedback, that's bullying, right? And so
Mhm.
that's a totally different conversation. And the approach that someone takes in a situation like that, once it's once you've reached out to others, maybe checked your first impressions, if it really is that, is to take a radically different approach. What often happens is that the feedback just hits us hard and we don't like it very much. Right. And it may not be delivered elegantly, but it wasn't done with malintent. It wasn't done with a sense of brutality. It was just we didn't like it. And maybe they were inelegant in the way they said it. So I think there's a few things we can do because we don't choose the feedback we get, but we choose where it goes. So what do you do? The first step, I think, is to really ask yourself a few questions. Okay. And to separate the signal from the noise. Is this something that is happening all the time or maybe just some of the time? Is this a permanent thing? Are they talking about something that is happening? It's a fixture in my work and they're telling me it's something that's happening all the time. And maybe I should ask myself, is that true? Is it not? Uh, Maybe others have seen this as well. I might want to ask other people. So you want to ask that question. And then you might want to ask the question of the person who gave it to you, where else do you see this? Or can you give me some other examples to help me gain more insight into this? So rather than get bitter as a first approach, try to get better answers, try to get better insights, try to get better steps and directions. So we choose the next step. And so that's important. Ask others for their take. Maybe they see it too, in which case we should maybe pay more attention to that feedback that our manager gave us, or go back to the manager and say, hey, I was thinking a lot about what you said. I'd love to know a little bit more about where you're seeing this. Can you give me some other examples or can you advise me on some next steps that I might take? And then, and I think this is the crucial piece, when the person is giving you that kind of feedback, let it sit before you react and try to work on it a little bit and think about, how to move forward. And then I would actually express, and this is hard, but I would express thanks. I would let the person know, look, and I didn't love what you said, but I really appreciate you saying it because I can't get better without knowing how to get better. And I need insights from everyone around me, including you, especially you as my manager, for how to do that. Giving that kind of an answer, almost like a sense of gratitude, does 2 things. Number 1, it's gonna let your manager know that you're invested in the active improvement, and it's almost a surprising response because a lot of people will just kind of take their lumps and then begrudgingly move on.
Hmm.
But if you say, "No, I'm really listening to what you're saying. I may not agree with all of it, that's why I have some questions about it, but I'm really grateful that you shared it with me," then that person is going to give you more feedback going forward. And this is really the key. they're also going to talk about that with others. And they're going to create more opportunities for that feedback stream to run more frequently, more clearly between you and other members of the team, and maybe with you and upper levels of management as well. Here's someone who not only listens to, who's receptive to feedback, they actually work on trying to make it something that's not just a suggestion, but actually an opportunity for improvement. And when we do that, we signal our good intentions. We also signal that we're ready to receive more feedback. And the more feedback we receive, the better we'll be.
Mhm. Something that resonates a lot with our philosophy at Get Abstract is turning knowledge into action. You said it before, if you don't turn knowledge into action, you won't make any progress. Joe, how should feedback be delivered to most effectively motivate others to take action?
I think it starts by making people know that, again, your intention is to support them and to help them. And once they realize that you're there as someone whose first priority and principle is to provoke an insight, to support progress, to spur improvement, that's a different kind of conversation than if they're not sure what your intention is. If they're there uh, to to subvert your progress, to to hold up your growth. So intention is really important. Frequency, like we said before, is also really important. The more naturally these conversations happen, the more likely they're going to lead to progress and to a transfer of knowledge into action. So one study that I really love, and I think it really speaks to the power of frequency and the power of high frequency feedback, was a study that NASA here in the United States did when trying to understand how to reduce the incidence of disasters in some of these flight simulations that they were running. And what they found is that the more frequently the members of a flight crew, it was the captain and the navigator and the assistant, um, the more frequently they shared feedback with each other, the more likely they were to identify those errors before they happened, and the more permission others felt to speak up about potential errors that they saw to postpone and preempt those disasters from ever happening. And I think within our teams, it's also equally important to have that sense of high frequency feedback. It may not be perfect, but it is going to be productive. And the more we do, the more will help get done. So the more feedback that we're sharing, the more that feedback stream is running, and the more that people can realize that feedback is just a natural part of our culture. It's a natural part of my work. And I want to know as much as I possibly can. I want to share as much as I possibly can because I want to turn mistakes into learning moments, because a learning moment leads to progress, leads to action. I can't fix what I don't know.
Mhm. While we are talking, while I'm listening to what you're saying, the chat is going crazy, Joe. Let's address some of the questions that our audience has. For example, any suggestion for a new leader now tasked with leading and providing feedback to staff who were just recently peers?
Yeah. I think you have one opportunity to set a feedback tone and a feedback culture in your workplace. And first impressions really make all the difference. And I think as new leaders, we should focus on trying to learn as much as we can from the people around us, and not to assume, but to ask. And so part of leading others to change, through change, or towards growth is trying to develop the kind of culture where people feel safe, psychologically safe, to have these conversations. And one way young leaders, new leaders can do that is by modeling as a first principle what it means to actually seek that feedback by seeking the feedback from others. So as a new leader, if I were to say to my team, look, I think it's so important. We can't grow together. We can't improve together if we don't learn from each other. I want you to always feel comfortable telling me if you think there's something that I might be doing differently or that we can be doing differently as a team. And I want to literally put that out there for you right away. I want to model my willingness to hear that feedback. And I might not always like it and I might not always agree with it, but I'm always going to want you to say it. And if you model that to your team, they will model that with each other. And that also makes it possible for you to then share that feedback with them. So feedback then becomes something that is happening all the time and not just some of the time. It's not just happening around performance review season. It's literally a part of our culture. It's just what we do here. And new managers have a chance to really set that tone from the start.
Mhm. Another question from the chat. And by the way, thank you for being here with us and for contributing. It's
Of
really,
course.
really great, the comments that are coming in. Is there a line between feedback and microlearning, Joe?
Mm.
Microlearning, I'm sorry. That question doesn't make sense. Is there a line between feedback and micromanaging? That makes more sense.
Micromanagement. Okay, I was wondering where that question was
Yeah,
coming from.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I'm sorry.
I think it's important that if we want feedback to be fearless, and I've seen this with a lot of the organizations that I'm working with currently, I think rather than just assume that this is how people want to hear my feedback, I should ask them perhaps how they'd like to receive it and how they best think we can move forward. This is especially important for teams where there's an agile model in the workplace. So a lot of the tech companies that I work with, some pharmaceuticals, they're agile workplaces, and I find that this is actually really important in terms of creating an efficiency in these stand-ups that they're having with each other all the time. The feedback is happening frequently, but also there's a clarity around how people want to receive this feedback, so there's no bottlenecks. So I might say to a member of my team,
Mhm,
um, would you like me to share feedback? Um, what intervals make sense for you for me to share feedback with you? How would you like me to share that? And in what ways would you like me to share that? Do you want this if you're a team that's working in person? Do you want me to drop by and share it? If it's a distributed workforce and it's remote teams, then how often do you want me to be logging in and sharing things on those channels? So I think asking others what their feedback preference is really essential. And this actually gets to some very interesting research in terms of how feedback is received by others. And there is a difference between people who are novices and people who are experts. And the research identifies novices as those with fewer than 3 years of experience in a particular role, and experts with having 5 or more years of experience in that role. And novices and experts, so called novices and experts, they want feedback differently. Novices
mhm,
want more context and coaching. Experts want more candor and clarity. And so how others want that feedback, that's important. So let's give them the feedback they want. And I think if we do that, then we're not going to be micromanaging them because we've asked the question, we've suited their preferences, but it's also going to be coming at an interval that works for them and doesn't feel very controlling.
mhm. That's really good advice. And sorry, I manipulated that question, not
That's great.
intentional.
It's also good for micro learning, micro moments for feedback.
I almost got you with that one. Joe, often physical behaviors rather than words convey messages. It's like facial expressions, gestures, posture, eye contact, subtle movements, like emotions, attitudes, reactions. Body language often sends signals that are easily misinterpreted. How can we be more mindful of our nonverbal communication when we give feedback?
Yeah, our feedback face is talking, right? Because even if we're not saying it, we're transmitting signals all the time for the reasons that you mentioned. And so I think it's important that as a feedback giver, we stop to sort of calibrate that feedback face before we get started and to make sure that if we're trying to deliver positive feedback that the audio that matches the visual, okay? The audio and the video match. And so um, one piece of really interesting research shows what happens when there is a mismatch between what we say and what we show. Uh, Individuals who were told to give negative feedback with positive facial affect, like, I really think you're doing a great job, but you had so many like interruptions in the last meeting, and I really wish you wouldn't have done that. So that actually makes the message go from bad to better. That people
Mhm,
see something that looks positive, and even though what we're saying is not, the visual cue is transmitting a much stronger signal, and that works in the other direction as well. When we have something positive to share, but we transmit it with a negative affect, like, I really think you're one of our best salespeople, but you say it with like doom and gloom, so they don't hear that. And so I think it's important to make that calibration and to make that match between what we're showing and what we're saying. But along with that, Ramona, I think it's also important for us to notice the other person's body language. As feedback givers, it's not just about calibrating our face, it's about paying attention and being a noticer to the signals that are being communicated by the other person. And I think if we are good noticers when we're giving feedback, we'll pay attention to those signals that are coming across. Like maybe there's a sudden shift in the person's tone, in the person's body language. Maybe they immediately cross their arms. Maybe their brows furrow and they look surprised or a little bit defensive. And that's the cue for us to say, "Hey, can I check something with you here? I'm getting a sense that something I just said may not have landed with you. Am I off base here?" Again, you're approaching with curiosity. You're not assuming, you're asking, but you're also showing that this is a conversation of care. I'm paying attention to you, and I'm paying attention to you because I care about you and I care about this conversation. I'm not just doing this because I think we have to get through it. And so checking our feedback face and paying attention to the signals of others and recalibrating our message or taking a step back or taking a pause, that conveys a lot of intention and attention on our part as givers.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Joe, you have mentioned it before. Using feed forward does improve performance. How is it also a trust building tool? That's a question I also found in our chat.
Yeah. Feedback, like we said earlier, it's about relationships. It's not just about ratings, not just about reports. And we have a really important opportunity here when giving feedback, not just to correct, but to actually congratulate, to focus on the positive. And I think we need to remember that feedback can be positive too. And
Hmm.
sometimes even those just because statements, I'm giving you this feedback just because I want to just call out something I saw you did great. And not for any particular reason. I just want to let you know that I noticed it. And I think it's fantastic. That just because kind of feedback is so important. And it actually is just better feedback. And this really interesting study that I love because it gets to this point of the power of positive feedback. If you were to ask someone, what would you prefer? Do you want a $50 gift card or a $5 gift card? So, right, of course, everyone wants the $50 gift card. But if you switch the dynamics of the question to how would you feel if I gave you a $50 gift card because, it's your 1-year work anniversary here with us or it's your birthday versus I'm giving you a $5 gift card because I just randomly give $5 gift cards or certificates because I think, when I see something great happening, I want to reward it. So either a formality or a just because. And it's astounding. More people would rather have a reward of lesser value that was given just because, not because of some formality. And so if
Hmm.
we adopt that approach in our own feedback, not just in
Hmm.
terms of the rewards and recognition in the workplace, but our feedback, and to use our feedback as a tool of reward, of recognition, we're going to not only deliver better results and better relationships within our workplace and improve the trust because people feel like, well, here's someone who knows me, likes me, trusts me, recognizes me. And so when they say something critical, I'm more willing to receive that message because I know where it's coming from that context of care. Like we said earlier, that you want to build authenticity, you build that not in sudden bursts, you build that in slow drips. All right. You can't decide one day to be authentic.
Hmm.
You create that over time, not in a moment, but over time.
Yeah.
And so when someone sees you embracing the power of positive feedback through this just because kind of recognition and using feedback as a tool to recognize people that way, it changes the whole dynamic of feedback. It not only makes people feel better, they're going to do better.
Mhm. That's a very nice message for the end. Unfortunately, we are already at the end of our 45 minutes. Time
Oh,
flies by. I
it
wanted
really
to
does.
mention a thing that I love about your book is that it's full of research and studies. Oh, now we have here overlap. I'm waiting till you're back. Here you go. I just wanted to say that I love your book because it's full of research and studies that back up what you're saying. It's really enlightening.
Yeah,
I want to
you
say
can
thank you to the audience for watching, for commenting. I'm sorry we couldn't address more questions. It's really, yep. Go ahead, Joe.
I would say I'd love for people, if you did have questions today that you didn't get answered, you can reach me on my website, joehirsch.me. I respond to every email that I get. So please, if there's something that you didn't hear today that you wanted to know more about, please send me a note and I'd love to continue the conversation offline.
Thank you for for that kind offer, Joe. And also, I recommend that you check out the feedback fix either in the Get Abstract library or of the book. I also have my email with recording of session in the next few days. And we at Get Abstract, we also embrace feedback as a means to get better. So please help us by filling out our quick survey. The link to the survey is posted in the chat. It's pinned up there. Fill it out either now or we will send the link with the follow-up email. You can fill it out later. That would be really helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah, also contact us at corporate@getabstract.com. Take Joe's offer, go to joehirsch.me, check out his LinkedIn profile, and yeah, stay tuned for further events. Thank you so much, Joe, for having been here with us today.
Thank you, Ramona, for a delightful conversation. And thank you, everyone, for your wonderful comments. And I look forward to making feedback fearless with you as we go forward together.